The steel doors of Riverside Correctional Facility clanged shut behind Officer Marcus Thompson as he began his first day on the night shift. The November rain drummed against the barred windows, casting eerie shadows down the dimly lit corridor of Block C. At 28, Marcus was ambitious, cocky, and eager to prove himself in what the veteran guards called the Forgotten Wing, where the oldest inmates spent their final years. "Listen up, rookie," growled Sergeant Rodriguez, a weathered man whose 20-year tenure had carved deep lines around his eyes. "Block C ain't like the others. These old-timers might look harmless, but some of them have stories that would curl your hair. Keep your distance, do your rounds, and don't get friendly." Marcus nodded, adjusting his uniform belt with practiced confidence. He'd worked at a medium security facility upstate for 3 years before transferring to Riverside, drawn by the promise of better pay and advancement opportunities. In his mind, guarding elderly inmates would be easy money, a stepping stone to the promotion he'd been chasing. "What's the deal with Cell 47?" Marcus asked, scanning his assignment sheet. The cell was marked with a red asterisk and the notation, "Minimal interaction." Rodriguez paused, his expression growing serious. "That's Benjamin Hayes. Been here for 42 years. Murder conviction, killed 3 men in a bar fight back in '82. He's what we call a ghost. Barely speaks, keeps to himself, causes zero trouble. But there's something about that old man." He shook his head. "Just follow protocol and leave him alone." As they walked the corridor, Marcus observed the inmates through their cell windows. Most were asleep or reading under the harsh fluorescent lights. The air smelled of disinfectant and decades of confinement. This was a place where time moved differently, where men came to disappear from the world. Cell 47 stood at the end of the corridor, and through the small window, Marcus caught his first glimpse of Benjamin Hayes. The man sat perfectly still on his narrow bunk, back straight, hands resting on his knees in what looked like a meditation pose. At 73, Hayes had silver hair cropped short, and despite his age, his shoulders remained broad. His face was weathered but alert, with steel-gray eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. "Looks harmless enough," Marcus muttered, making a note on his clipboard. Rodriguez caught the comment and stopped walking. "Let me give you some advice, Thompson. In this business, the quiet ones are often the most dangerous. Hayes has been a model prisoner for 4 decades, but that doesn't mean he's weak. I've seen younger men try to test him over the years. It never ended well for them." "What do you mean?" "Nothing violent. Hayes never threw a punch, but somehow troublemakers who bothered him would find themselves in situations, transferred to worse facilities, losing privileges, having their parole applications mysteriously delayed. It was like the man had invisible influence, even from inside a cell." Marcus dismissed this as typical prison folklore. Every facility had its legends and ghost stories. As far as he was concerned, Benjamin Hayes was just another old convict who'd learned to survive by keeping his head down. The rest of the shift passed uneventfully. Marcus completed his rounds, filed his reports, and familiarized himself with the block's routine. But as dawn approached and the night shift prepared to end, he found himself drawn back to Cell 47. Hayes hadn't moved from his position, still sitting upright, still perfectly still, as if he'd been carved from stone. Through the intercom, Marcus heard Hayes speak for the first time. A barely audible, "Good morning, Officer Thompson," in a voice that was calm, measured, and somehow unsettling in its quiet authority. Marcus hadn't introduced himself. His nameplate was facing away from the cell window, yet somehow this silent old man knew exactly who he was. As Marcus left the facility that morning, stepping into the gray Philadelphia dawn, he couldn't shake the feeling that his first encounter with Benjamin Hayes was just the beginning of something much larger than a routine prison assignment. Chapter 2. Testing Boundaries. 3 weeks into his assignment, Marcus had fallen into a comfortable routine on Block C. The elderly inmates posed no physical threat, and the nights passed quietly with card games, paperwork, and the occasional medical emergency. But Benjamin Hayes continued to intrigue him, and increasingly irritate him. The old man maintained his rigid schedule with military precision. Wake at 4:30 a.m., calisthenics in his cell, breakfast at exactly 6, then hours of reading or writing in composition notebooks that he somehow managed to obtain. He spoke only when necessary, always politely, and never complained about anything. Yet there was something about his demeanor that rubbed Marcus the wrong way. Maybe it was the way Hayes carried himself. Too straight, too composed, like he thought he was better than everyone else. Maybe it was how other inmates seemed to defer to him, asking for his advice in hushed tones during recreation time. Or maybe it was simply that Marcus had never encountered someone so completely unimpressed by authority. "You know, Hayes," Marcus said during his Wednesday night round, stopping at cell 47 with his arms crossed, "you act like you're running this place instead of rotting in it." Benjamin looked up from his book, a thick volume on criminal psychology, and met Marcus's gaze with those unsettling grey eyes. "I'm simply serving my time, Officer Thompson." "Yeah, well, your time is my time now. And I don't like inmates who think they're special." Marcus tapped his baton against the cell bars. "You've been here so long you probably think you own this block. But things change. New management means new rules." Benjamin carefully placed a bookmark in his page and set the book aside. When he spoke, his voice remained perfectly calm. "I have no desire for conflict, officer. I follow all regulations and cause no disturbances. Is there something specific you need me to do differently?" The polite response only fueled Marcus's irritation. He wanted a reaction, anger, fear, something that would confirm his authority. Instead, Hayes responded like he was addressing a subordinate, rather than the man who controlled his daily existence. "Maybe you need to learn some respect," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. "You think because you're old you get a free pass? You think your 40-plus years here makes you some kind of institution?" A few inmates in nearby cells had stopped what they were doing to listen. Marcus noticed their attention and decided to make an example. He pulled out his radio and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is Thompson in Block C. I need a cell inspection team for 47. Suspicious activity." He looked directly at Hayes. "Random inspection, old man. Let's see how organized you really are." Benjamin simply nodded and stood up, moving to the back corner of his cell as protocol required. "Of course, Officer Thompson. I'll cooperate fully." 20 minutes later, 3 officers arrived to conduct the inspection. They searched through Hayes's meager possessions, extra uniforms, toiletries, his notebooks, and about 30 books. Everything was meticulously organized and completely regulation compliant. They found nothing suspicious, nothing contraband, nothing that violated any prison rule. "Clean as a whistle," reported Officer Martinez, the inspection team leader. "This guy's probably the most organized inmate in the whole facility." After they left, Marcus felt foolish but wasn't about to back down. "Don't think this changes anything, Hayes. I'll be watching you." Benjamin had already returned to his reading position. Without looking up, he said quietly, "Officer Thompson, may I ask you something?" "What? What do you hope to accomplish here? You're young, ambitious, I can see that. But what's your endgame?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You have potential. I've observed how you handle situations, how you interact with other staff. You could go far in corrections, or even law enforcement in general. But this," Benjamin gestured mildly between them, "this serves no purpose except to waste both our time." Marcus felt his face flush. "Don't analyze me, old man. You don't know anything about me or my potential." "Perhaps not," Benjamin replied, returning to his book. "But I know quite a bit about wasted potential. I've seen it many times over the years." As Marcus walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that Benjamin Hayes had just delivered a warning disguised as advice. The old man's calm confidence was beginning to feel less like resignation and more like the patience of someone who knew something Marcus didn't. That night, Marcus found himself researching Hayes's case file on the computer system, searching for clues about who this mysterious inmate really was. Chapter 3. The First Crack. Marcus spent his days off digging into Benjamin Hayes's background, but the official records were frustratingly sparse. The case file from 1982 described a bar fight that escalated into a triple homicide. Hayes had been found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. 3 men dead, all with military backgrounds, all killed with precise, almost surgical efficiency that suggested professional training. What bothered Marcus was what wasn't in the file. No mention of Hayes's occupation before the incident, no family contacts, no psychological evaluations. For a case that should have generated hundreds of pages of documentation, the file was oddly thin, as if someone had deliberately scrubbed away the details. When Marcus returned to work the following Monday, he was determined to crack Hayes's composed facade. The old man's quiet confidence had been eating at him all weekend, and he'd convinced himself that beneath the polite exterior was just another career criminal who needed to be reminded of his place. "Morning, Hayes," Marcus said during his first round, making sure to bang his baton against the cell bars loudly enough to wake anyone who might still be sleeping. "Sleep well in your palace?" Benjamin, who had been writing in one of his notebooks, looked up without any trace of annoyance. "Good morning, Officer Thompson. Yes, thank you for asking." The perfectly cordial response made Marcus's jaw clench. "What are you always writing in those books anyway? Your memoirs? Planning your next crime spree? Personal reflections mostly? I find writing helps maintain mental clarity during long periods of confinement." Benjamin set down his pen and gave Marcus his full attention. "It's a technique I learned years ago for managing stress and maintaining focus under difficult circumstances." "Sounds like prison psychology bullshit to me," Marcus sneered. "You know what I think? I think you're putting on an act, playing the reformed old man so everyone thinks you're harmless, but I see right through it." For the first time since Marcus had known him, Benjamin's expression shifted slightly. Not anger or fear, but something that looked almost like disappointment. "Officer Thompson, may I ask what you hope to achieve with this confrontation? I want you to drop the act. Show me who you really are instead of this Zen master routine." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that was suddenly uncomfortable. When he spoke, his voice carried a new weight. "You really want to know who I am?" "Yeah, I do." Benjamin stood up slowly, and for the first time Marcus noticed how the old man moved, fluid, controlled, like every step was calculated. "I'm someone who spent 30 years teaching young agents how to read people, how to spot deception, how to survive in hostile environments. And right now I'm looking at a young man who's angry about something that has nothing to do with me." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about? Teaching agents? You're frustrated about your career, aren't you? 3 years at a medium security facility, and you're still just a corrections officer. You came here thinking it would be a stepping stone, but you're starting to realize that working the graveyard shift in a geriatric ward isn't exactly fast-track material." The accuracy of Benjamin's assessment hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You don't know what you're talking about. Your posture says otherwise. The way you carry yourself screams insecurity masked as aggression. Classic overcompensation." Benjamin moved closer to the cell bars, and Marcus found himself taking an involuntary step backward. "I've trained hundreds of young law enforcement officers over the years, Officer Thompson. I know the signs." "Trained officers? You're a murderer. You're in here for life." Benjamin's smile was thin and contained no warmth. "Yes, I killed 3 men in 1982. Do you know who they were?" Marcus shook his head, suddenly feeling like he was in deeper water than he'd intended. "They were mercenaries, soldiers of fortune who'd been hired to eliminate a federal witness I was protecting. They found us in that bar in Chicago, and they came to finish a job. I had 2 choices: let them complete their mission or stop them permanently." Benjamin's voice remained steady, but his eyes had gone cold. "I chose to stop them." The corridor suddenly felt very quiet. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The federal witness lived to testify. A major organized crime family was brought down because of that testimony. But I'd killed 3 men in what appeared to be a bar fight. And sometimes, Officer Thompson, the system requires sacrifices to maintain larger operations. Marcus's mouth had gone dry. "You're saying you worked for the government?" "I'm saying that sometimes good people end up in bad places for reasons that aren't in any official file." Benjamin returned to his bunk and picked up his pen. "Now, do you still want to play games? Or can we both get back to doing our jobs?" As Marcus walked away from cell 47, his hands were shaking. Everything he thought he knew about Benjamin Hayes had just been turned upside down, and he was beginning to realize he might have picked a fight with someone far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 4. Digging Deeper. Marcus couldn't focus on anything for the rest of his shift. Benjamin's revelation, if it was true, changed everything. But it could also be an elaborate lie designed to intimidate him. Convicted murderers weren't exactly known for their honesty, and Marcus had heard plenty of inmates spin tales about their past importance. The next evening, he decided to do some real research. Using his access to law enforcement databases, Marcus began cross-referencing the date of Hayes' arrest with federal cases from 1982. What he found made his stomach drop. On November 15, 1982, 3 days after Hayes' arrest, Vincent the Shark Torino, a high-ranking member of the Chicago-Torino crime family, was convicted on multiple RICO charges. The key witness was Anthony Castellano, a former family accountant who had agreed to testify in exchange for witness protection. Marcus dug deeper. Castellano's testimony had been delayed twice due to security concerns. The prosecutor's notes mentioned credible threats against the witness and ongoing protective measures by federal agents. Then, buried in a supplementary report, Marcus found a single line that made his blood run cold. Protective detail compromised on November 12th. Agent Hayes neutralized immediate threat. Agent Hayes. Marcus's hands trembled as he pulled up Benjamin's booking photo from 1982. The man in the mugshot was 40 years younger but unmistakable. The same steel-gray eyes, the same composed expression, even while being processed for triple homicide. But it was the next document that nearly made Marcus fall out of his chair. A heavily redacted FBI personnel file with Benjamin Hayes's name at the top. Most of the information was blacked out, but he could make out fragments. Behavioral Analysis Unit, Training Division, Specialized Tactics Instructor, and most chilling of all, Classified Operations, Need-to-Know Basis. Marcus realized he'd been harassing a former FBI agent who had sacrificed his freedom to protect a federal witness. The revelation should have made him back off, but instead, it fed his resentment. If Hayes was such a big shot, why was he rotting in prison like any other criminal? Why hadn't the FBI gotten him out? And why was Marcus only learning this now? Over the next few nights, Marcus found himself testing Hayes in subtle ways, looking for cracks in the old man's composure. He delayed meal deliveries, made unnecessary noise during Hayes's writing time, and conducted random searches of his cell. Through it all, Benjamin remained perfectly polite and cooperative, which only made Marcus more determined to find his breaking point. The turning point came on a Thursday night when Marcus was feeling particularly vindictive. He'd just learned that his application for transfer to the Detective Bureau had been rejected again, and he was looking for someone to blame for his stalled career. "Hey, Hayes," he called out during his 2 a.m. round. "I've been thinking about your story. The big FBI agent brought down by a bar fight. Pretty pathetic way for a federal hero to end up, don't you think?" Benjamin looked up from a letter he was writing. "Is there something you need, Officer Thompson? I need to understand how someone who supposedly trained FBI agents ends up spending his life in a cage. Makes me wonder if you were really as important as you claim." "I never claimed to be important," Benjamin replied quietly. "I simply did my job." "Your job got you life in prison. Sounds like you weren't very good at it." For the first time, Marcus saw something flicker in Benjamin's eyes. Not anger, but something deeper. Sadness, maybe, or regret. "You're right," Benjamin said softly. "I failed at the most important part of my job. I was supposed to protect people without becoming what I was fighting against. When I killed those men, I crossed a line that I can never uncross. That's why I'm here, Officer Thompson. Not because the system failed, but because I did." The quiet admission deflated Marcus's anger. He'd expected defiance or justification, not this raw acknowledgement of failure. For a moment, he almost felt sorry for the old man. Almost. "Well, at least you're honest about being a failure," Marcus said, forcing his voice to remain hard. "Enjoy your letter writing, has been." As he walked away, Marcus missed the way Benjamin's grip tightened on his pen, or how the old man's jaw muscle twitched, the first signs that even the most controlled person has limits. And in his cell, Benjamin Hayes began to wonder if it might be time to remind young Officer Thompson that some lessons are more dangerous to learn than others. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. Marcus had been pushing Benjamin Hayes for 2 months now, and the old man's unflappable composure was driving him to distraction. Every insult, every petty harassment, every attempt to break him down was met with the same polite professionalism. It was like trying to anger a statue. The night everything changed started like any other. February rain pelted the prison windows as Marcus began his shift, already in a foul mood. His girlfriend Sarah had broken up with him that afternoon, citing his anger issues and obsession with proving himself. She'd thrown his ring back at him and told him he was becoming someone she didn't recognize. Marcus blamed Hayes for his deteriorating life. The old man had gotten under his skin, made him question everything about his career and his methods. Before Hayes, Marcus had been confident, ambitious, focused. Now he was consumed with the need to crack this one inmate's facade. "Evening, Hayes," Marcus said, stopping at cell 47 with barely contained hostility. "How's the great FBI legend tonight, still writing your memoirs about all the important cases you solved before you became a 3-time killer?" Benjamin looked up from his book, a biography of J. Edgar Hoover, and studied Marcus with those unsettling grey eyes. "Officer Thompson, you seem particularly agitated tonight. Is everything all right?" The genuine concern in Benjamin's voice was the last straw. Marcus slammed his baton against the cell bars, the metallic clang echoing down the corridor. "Don't you dare pretend to care about me. You're a murderer, a washed-up has-been who threw away his career and his life for what? 3 dead mercenaries who probably deserved it anyway." Several inmates had come to their cell windows to watch the confrontation. Marcus was past caring about maintaining professional composure. "You want to know what I think, Hayes? I think you're a coward. I think when things got tough, when the real pressure came down, you cracked. You took the easy way out and killed those men, instead of finding a better solution. A real agent would have found another way." Benjamin slowly closed his book and stood up. When he moved to the front of his cell, Marcus noticed that the old man's hands were perfectly steady, his breathing controlled. It was the calm of someone who had been pushed to his limit, but retained complete control over his response. "Officer Thompson," Benjamin said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I'm going to give you some advice. Turn around, finish your rounds, and go home. Don't push this any further." "Or what?" Marcus laughed, but there was a hysterical edge to it. "What are you going to do? You're locked in a cage, old man. You're powerless. You're nothing." Benjamin stepped closer to the bars, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with electricity. "Marcus," he said, using the officer's first name for the first time, "you have no idea what you're dealing with. I've been patient with you because I understand what you're going through, but patience has limits." "Are you threatening me?" Marcus reached for his radio. "Because threatening a corrections officer is a serious offense. Maybe you need some time in solitary to remember your place." "I'm not threatening you," Benjamin replied. "I'm warning you. There's a difference. But since you seem determined to learn the hard way, let me share something that's not in any official file." Benjamin gripped the cell bars, his knuckles white. "Do you know why those 3 men really died that night in Chicago? It wasn't because I couldn't find another way. It was because I wanted them dead. They had spent 6 months hunting my witness, terrorizing his family, torturing his associates for information. When I found them in that bar, they were planning to rape and murder Castellano's teenage daughter, to send a message." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "So, yes, Officer Thompson, I killed them. I killed them with my bare hands, and I enjoyed every second of it. And do you know what I learned that night? I learned that the line between justice and revenge is much thinner than they teach you in the academy." The corridor had gone completely silent. Even the usual background noise of the prison seemed to have stopped. "Now," Benjamin continued, his voice carrying an authority that made Marcus's spine straighten involuntarily, "you can file your report about threatening behavior. You can try to have me transferred to solitary. You can continue playing these little games. But ask yourself this. If I've been in here for 42 years without incident and suddenly I'm making implied threats, what do you think that means?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. "It means," Benjamin said with deadly calm, "that you've finally succeeded in making me angry. And Marcus, you really don't want to see what happens when I stop being patient." As Benjamin returned to his bunk and picked up his book as if nothing had happened, Marcus realized that for the first time in 2 months, he was genuinely afraid of the quiet old man in cell 47. Chapter 6. Consequences. Marcus didn't file a report about the incident. Something in Benjamin's tone had convinced him that escalating the situation would be a mistake, though he couldn't quite articulate why. Instead, he spent the rest of his shift avoiding cell 47 and trying to convince himself that he was still in control of the situation. But word traveled fast in prison, and by the next evening, Marcus noticed changes in how the other inmates looked at him. Where before they had shown the usual wary respect due to his uniform, now there was something else in their eyes. Pity, maybe, or anticipation, like they were waiting for something to happen. "Thompson," called out Rodriguez as Marcus checked in for his shift. "Everything okay on Block C? Some of the day shift guards are saying the atmosphere feels different." "Different how?" "Tense, like something's brewing." Rodriguez studied Marcus's face. "You haven't been having problems with any of the inmates, have you? Because if someone's giving you trouble, We need to know about it. Marcus shook his head quickly. No problems. Everything's under control. But everything was not under control, and Marcus knew it. Over the next week, small things began going wrong. His patrol schedule got mixed up, causing him to miss mandatory check-ins. His locker combination stopped working, requiring maintenance to cut off the lock. A formal complaint was filed against him for unprofessional conduct by an inmate he was certain he'd never interacted with. Each incident was minor, explainable, barely worth investigating. But together, they painted a picture of an officer who was losing his grip on his responsibilities. The real blow came on a Tuesday morning when Marcus was called into Warden Morrison's office. Morrison was a no-nonsense administrator who had been running Riverside for 15 years with an iron fist and zero tolerance for drama. "Thompson, sit down," Morrison said, without looking up from a thick file on his desk. "We need to discuss your performance." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Is there a problem, sir?" "You tell me." Morrison opened the file and began reading. 3 formal complaints in 2 weeks, missed check-ins, equipment malfunctions, and yesterday I received an interesting phone call from the State Corrections Board asking about your interrogation techniques with elderly inmates. "Sir, I haven't interrogated anyone. I've followed all protocols." "Have you?" Morrison finally looked up, his expression stern. "Because according to my sources, you've been conducting unofficial interviews with inmate Hayes in Block C, personal conversations that go well beyond standard officer-inmate interactions." Marcus's mouth went dry. Who could have reported that? The only witnesses to his conversations with Benjamin were other inmates, and inmates complaining about guard behavior was usually dismissed unless there was serious misconduct involved. "Sir, Hayes is a convicted murderer. I was trying to assess whether he poses any security risks to the facility." Morrison's laugh was cold. "Hayes? Marcus, that man has been the most compliant inmate in this facility for over 4 decades. His disciplinary record is spotless. If you want to assess security risks, maybe you should look in the mirror." The words hit Marcus like a slap. "What do you mean?" "I mean that in 2 months you've gone from a promising officer to someone who's generating more complaints than inmates we have in maximum security." Morrison closed the file with a sharp snap. "I'm transferring you back to day shift, general population. Maybe working with younger, more active inmates will give you something more appropriate to focus your energy on." The transfer was effective immediately. As Marcus cleaned out his locker in Block C that evening, he caught sight of Benjamin through his cell window. The old man was sitting in his usual meditation pose, perfectly still, perfectly calm. But when their eyes met, Benjamin nodded slightly, a gesture that somehow felt more like a dismissal than a farewell. Walking out of Block C for the last time, Marcus realized that Benjamin Hayes had just taught him a lesson about power that wasn't covered in any corrections manual. The old man had destroyed his reputation and derailed his career without ever raising his voice, filing a complaint or breaking a single rule. As the steel doors clanged shut behind him, Marcus understood that he had been playing chess with a grandmaster while thinking he was playing checkers, and he had lost decisively without even realizing the game had begun. In his cell, Benjamin Hayes returned to his book, allowing himself the smallest of smiles. Sometimes the most important lessons were the ones that hurt the most to learn. Chapter 7. Revelations. 3 weeks into his new assignment in general population, Marcus was miserable. The younger inmates were hostile, disrespectful, and constantly testing boundaries. Every day brought fights, contraband searches, and the kind of chaos that made Block C's quiet routine seem like paradise in comparison. Worse, word had somehow spread about his problems with an elderly inmate, making him a laughingstock among both prisoners and guards. Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Benjamin Hayes. The old man's calm dismissal haunted him, and he found himself researching obsessively, trying to understand how a 73-year-old prisoner had systematically dismantled his career without appearing to lift a finger. The breakthrough came when Marcus discovered that his cousin Danny worked as a records clerk for the FBI field office in Philadelphia. Over beers at a dive bar in South Philly, Marcus carefully brought up Benjamin's name. "Hayes, Benjamin Hayes," Danny mused, pulling up files on his tablet. "That name sounds familiar. Let me check the archived personnel records." What Danny found made both men go silent. Benjamin Hayes's FBI file was massive, over 800 pages spanning a 30-year career that began in 1952 and ended abruptly in 1982. Most of it was classified, but the summary alone was staggering. "Jesus Christ, Marcus," Danny whispered, reading from the screen. This guy wasn't just any agent, he was a legend. Behavioral Analysis Unit pioneer, advanced interrogation specialist, training instructor for elite tactical units. It says here he personally trained over 400 federal agents during his career. Marcus felt sick. What else does it say? He was involved in some of the biggest cases of the 60s and 70s. Organized crime, domestic terrorism, serial killers. Marcus, this guy helped build the modern FBI. He developed half the psychological profiling techniques they still use today. Danny scrolled through more records. Wait, there's more. It says he went undercover for extended periods, sometimes for years at a time. Deep cover operations in organized crime families, radical political groups. This man was basically a ghost who could become anyone he needed to be. The pieces began falling into place for Marcus. Benjamin's ability to read people, his calm under pressure, his mysterious influence within the prison, these weren't the traits of a broken-down old convict. They were the refined skills of someone who had spent decades manipulating situations and people at the highest levels of law enforcement. Danny, what happened in 1982? Why did he end up in prison? Danny's expression grew grave as he read further. The file gets heavily redacted here, but it looks like he was on a deep cover assignment that went bad. Something about compromised federal witnesses and a blown operation. Then there's this note. Agent Hayes chose to maintain cover identity to preserve ongoing investigation, conviction necessary to protect classified operations. Marcus stared at his cousin. Are you saying he went to prison on purpose? It looks like it. Like he took the fall to protect something bigger. Danny closed the tablet, looking shaken. Marcus, you've been messing with someone who probably knows more about psychological warfare than most people know about tying their shoes. What the hell did you do to piss him off? That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Everything he thought he knew about Benjamin Hayes had been wrong. The quiet old man wasn't a broken convict serving out his final years. He was a master manipulator who had chosen his fate to serve a larger purpose. And Marcus had spent 2 months trying to intimidate him with the psychological equivalent of a water gun. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He put in a request to visit Block C during his lunch break, claiming he needed to retrieve some personal items from his old locker. It was a lie, but he needed to see Benjamin again, needed to understand what had really happened between them. When Marcus approached cell 47, Benjamin was reading as usual. He looked up when Marcus stopped at his window, showing no surprise at seeing his former tormentor. "Officer Thompson," Benjamin said, with the same polite tone he'd always used. "This is unexpected." Marcus took a deep breath. "I know who you are. I know about your FBI career, about the deep cover operations, about what really happened in 1982. Benjamin carefully marked his place in the book and set it aside. "Do you now? You didn't just kill 3 men in a bar fight. You sacrificed your entire career to protect an operation. You chose to come here. And what difference does that make, Officer Thompson?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "It changes everything. You're not a criminal. You're a hero who got thrown under the bus by the system." Benjamin's laugh was dry and humorless. "Marcus, I killed 3 human beings with my bare hands. The reasons behind it don't change that fact. I crossed a line that night, and I've spent 42 years paying for it. Whether you call me a hero or a villain is irrelevant. But you were protecting people. You were doing your job. My job was to find legal solutions to problems. When I chose violence, I stopped being an agent and became exactly what I was supposed to fight against." Benjamin stood up and moved closer to the bars. "The badge doesn't give you the right to be judge, jury, and executioner, no matter how righteous your cause feels in the moment." Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I said, everything I did. I didn't understand." "Understanding isn't the same as wisdom, Marcus. You understand who I was, but do you understand who I am now?" Benjamin's grey eyes were gentle but firm. "I'm a 73-year-old man who has spent half his life learning that true strength comes from restraint, not dominance. That real power is knowing when not to use it. Can you forgive me?" Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. "Forgiveness isn't mine to give or withhold, Marcus, but I will say this. You have potential, real potential. The question is what you're going to do with it." As Marcus walked away from cell 47 for what he thought was the last time, he carried with him the weight of a lesson that would reshape everything he thought he knew about justice, power, and redemption. Chapter 8. The Student. Over the following months, Marcus found himself returning to Block C whenever his schedule allowed. What started as guilt-driven apology visits gradually evolved into something neither man had expected: genuine conversations about life, justice, and the complex moral landscape of law enforcement. Benjamin, despite his initial wariness, began to see in Marcus the same potential he had once nurtured in young FBI recruits. The guard's anger and frustration, properly channeled, could become passion for justice. His need to prove himself could transform into dedication to genuine service. "Tell me about your first day as an FBI agent," Marcus said during one of their talks, settling into a chair that Benjamin had somehow arranged to be placed outside cell 47 during their discussions. "October 15th, 1952, Benjamin replied without hesitation. "I was 23 years old, fresh out of law school, convinced I was going to save the world. My first assignment was filing reports in the Organized Crime Division, 12 hours a day of paperwork, cross-referencing witness statements, and trying to make sense of surveillance photographs. That sounds boring. It was essential. You can't understand criminal behavior until you understand criminal patterns. You can't predict what someone will do until you know what they've already done." Benjamin's eyes took on the distant look they got when he was remembering his former life. "My supervisor, Agent Frank Morrison, no relation to our warden, used to say that detective work was like archaeology. You dig through layers of evidence until you find the truth buried underneath." Marcus leaned forward. "Is that how you learned to read people so well?" "Reading people isn't about some mystical insight, Marcus. It's about observation, pattern recognition, and understanding human psychology. Everyone tells you who they are, through their posture, their word choices, their reactions to stress. Most people just don't know how to listen." "Teach me." Benjamin studied Marcus for a long moment. "Why?" "Because I want to be better at this job. I want to understand people instead of just controlling them. I want to be the kind of officer who actually makes a difference." "That's a dangerous wish, Marcus. Understanding people means accepting their complexity, their contradictions. It's easier to see the world in black and white than to navigate all the shades of grey." But something in Marcus's earnest expression seemed to reach Benjamin. Over the weeks that followed, their conversations became informal lessons. Benjamin shared techniques for reading body language, methods for establishing rapport during interrogations, and insights into criminal psychology that weren't taught in any academy. "Observe Officer Rodriguez when he's dealing with agitated inmates," Benjamin suggested during one session. "Watch how he positions his body, how he modulates his voice. He's diffusing situations before they escalate because he understands that respect is more powerful than fear." Marcus began applying Benjamin's teachings to his work in general population. He learned to identify the signs that preceded fights, to recognize when inmates were hiding contraband based on their nervous habits, to distinguish between genuine threats and empty posturing. His incident reports dropped dramatically, and his success rate in resolving conflicts without violence improved markedly. Warden Morrison noticed the change. During Marcus's quarterly review, he commented on the remarkable improvement in the young officer's performance. "Whatever you've been doing differently, Thompson, keep it up. You're starting to look like the officer I thought you could be when I hired you." But Marcus's real education was in understanding the weight of responsibility that came with power. Benjamin shared stories from his FBI career, not the glamorous cases that made headlines, but the small decisions that shaped lives. The choice to give someone a second chance or throw them to the wolves. The moment when gathering evidence crossed the line into harassment. The difference between justice and revenge. "Power corrupts, Marcus," Benjamin said during one of their evening discussions. "Not because power is inherently evil, but because it insulates you from consequences. When you can control someone's life with a phone call or a report, it becomes easy to forget that they're human beings with hopes and fears just like yours." "Is that what happened to you? Did the power corrupt you?" Benjamin was quiet for a long time before answering. "I became convinced that I was above the rules because I was serving a greater good. When those 3 men threatened my witness's family, I didn't see them as human beings anymore. I saw them as obstacles to be removed. That's the moment I stopped being a protector and became a predator. But you saved innocent lives, at the cost of my soul, Marcus. That's not a trade I'd recommend to anyone." As spring turned to summer, Marcus realized that his weekly conversations with Benjamin had become the most important part of his week. The old man was teaching him not just how to be a better corrections officer, but how to be a better person. And for the first time since arriving at Riverside, Marcus felt like he was on a path that might actually lead somewhere meaningful. What he didn't know was that Benjamin Hayes was preparing to give him the most important lesson of all, one that would test everything Marcus had learned about justice, loyalty, and the true cost of doing the right thing. Chapter 9. The Test. On a humid August evening, Marcus arrived at Block C to find an unusual tension in the air. The elderly inmates were quieter than normal, and he noticed several of them exchanging meaningful glances as he passed their cells. When he reached cell 47, Benjamin was standing at his window waiting. "We need to talk, Marcus," Benjamin said, without his usual greeting. "Something's happening tonight that will test everything you've learned over these past months." Marcus pulled his chair closer to the cell. "What kind of something? Do you remember what I told you about power and corruption? About the moment when someone crosses the line from protector to predator?" "Of course." Benjamin's expression was grim. "Tonight you're going to witness that crossing, and you'll have to decide what kind of officer, what kind of man you want to be." Before Marcus could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. 3 men in corrections uniforms were walking toward them, but Marcus didn't recognize any of them. Their movements were purposeful, predatory, and they carried themselves with the swagger of people who believed themselves untouchable. "Hayes," called the lead man, a thick-set officer with sergeant stripes and cold eyes. "Time for your special interview." Marcus stood up, confused. "What interview? I wasn't notified of any scheduled interrogations." The sergeant, his name tag read Kowalski, barely glanced at Marcus. "This doesn't concern you, rookie. Take a walk. I'm the assigned officer for this block. Nothing happens here without my knowledge." Kowalski stepped closer, his breath smelling of alcohol and cigarettes. "Listen, Thompson, you can make this easy or you can make this hard. But either way, we're taking Hayes for a little conversation about some missing contraband." Marcus looked at Benjamin, who remained perfectly calm despite the obvious threat. "What contraband? Hayes doesn't have contraband. I've searched his cell dozens of times." "Maybe you haven't been looking hard enough," sneered one of Kowalski's companions, a wiry man with nervous energy and darting eyes. "Amazing what you can find when you know where to look." The implication was clear. They were planning to plant evidence and then use it as justification for whatever they intended to do to Benjamin. Marcus felt his training kick in, all of Benjamin's lessons about reading situations and recognizing danger. "Sergeant, I need to see authorization for this interview. Standard protocol requires—" "Fuck protocol," Kowalski snarled, grabbing Marcus by the shirt. "You want to keep your job, you walk away right now. This old bastard has been causing problems for certain people, and it's time to remind him that reputation doesn't mean shit when you're locked in a cage." Marcus's mind raced. Certain people. This wasn't about contraband. This was about someone outside the prison who wanted Benjamin silenced. Someone who knew about his past and saw him as a threat, even after 4 decades behind bars. "Open the cell, Thompson," Kowalski ordered. "Now." Marcus looked at Benjamin, who gave him the slightest nod. Not permission, but acknowledgement. The old man knew this moment would come eventually, and he was trusting Marcus to make the right choice. "No," Marcus said quietly. "What did you say?" "I said no. I'm not opening that cell without proper authorization and a witness from administration." Kowalski's face flushed red with anger. "You stupid kid, do you have any idea who you're protecting? Hayes isn't some harmless old man. He's a killer. He murdered 3 people in cold blood, and now he thinks he can pull strings from his cell like some kind of mob boss." "I know exactly who he is," Marcus replied, his voice growing stronger. "And I know that what you're planning isn't justice. It's revenge. Maybe even murder." The corridor fell silent, except for the sound of breathing and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. The other inmates had moved away from their windows, sensing the violence that was about to erupt. Kowalski reached for his radio. "Control, this is Sergeant Kowalski. I have a situation in Block C. Officer Thompson is refusing to follow direct orders and may be compromised." But before he could complete the transmission, Benjamin's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Sergeant Kowalski," he said, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Before you make a mistake that ends your career and possibly your life, you should know that this conversation is being recorded." Kowalski froze. "What are you talking about?" Benjamin held up a small device that had been concealed in his hand. Digital recorder, courtesy of a friend in the FBI tech division. Every word you've spoken in the last 5 minutes is now preserved for posterity, including your confession to planning evidence and your threats against a federal witness. You're bluffing. Inmates can't have recording devices. Former FBI agents who spent 30 years building relationships throughout the justice system can have whatever they need, Sergeant. The question is, do you want to walk away right now? Or do you want to explain to a federal judge why you were attempting to assault a protected witness in federal custody? Marcus watched as understanding dawned on Kowalski's face. Benjamin hadn't been powerless all these years. He'd been protected. Someone in the federal system had been watching over him, ensuring his safety in exchange for his continued silence about classified operations. "This isn't over, Hayes," Kowalski snarled, but he was already backing away. "Yes, it is," Benjamin replied calmly. "And Sergeant, if you ever threaten Officer Thompson again or attempt to intimidate any inmate in this facility, you'll discover that my patience has definite limits." As the 3 corrupt officers retreated down the corridor, Marcus realized his hands were shaking. He'd just faced down superior officers, risked his career and possibly his life to protect an inmate. 6 months ago, he would have been the one threatening Benjamin. Now he'd chosen to stand between him and harm. "How did you know they were coming?" Marcus asked. Benjamin smiled and held up the recorder, which Marcus now realized was actually just an old radio with the antenna broken off. "I didn't. But you did. You saw the signs, read the situation, and made the right choice even when it was dangerous. I could lose my job for this." "You could. But Marcus, tonight you discovered something more valuable than job security. You learned what it feels like to choose justice over convenience, protection over advancement. That's a lesson worth any price." As Marcus walked home that night, he understood that Benjamin Hayes had just given him the most important test of his life. And for the first time since becoming a corrections officer, he felt proud of the badge he wore. Chapter 10. Legacy. 3 months later, Marcus stood in Warden Morrison's office, holding a letter that would change his life forever. The FBI Academy at Quantico was accepting his application for their behavioral analysis program, a highly selective course that typically required years of law enforcement experience and advanced degrees. "I have to admit, Thompson, I'm surprised," Morrison said, leaning back in his chair. 6 months ago I was ready to fire you. Now the FBI is fast-tracking your application based on a recommendation from someone very high up in their organization. Marcus knew exactly who had made that recommendation, though Benjamin had never mentioned it directly. During their conversations over the past months, the old man had been preparing him for this moment, teaching him not just about human behavior, but about the deeper principles that guided effective law enforcement. "There's one condition," Morrison continued. "You have to finish your commitment here first, 6 more months, and then you're free to pursue your federal career." That evening, Marcus made his way to Block C for what had become a ritual, his weekly extended conversation with Benjamin Hayes. But instead of finding the old man reading or writing, Marcus discovered him packing his few possessions into a small cardboard box. "Benjamin, what's happening?" Benjamin looked up with the expression Marcus had never seen before, something that might have been peace or perhaps relief. "I'm being transferred, Marcus. After 42 years, it seems my federal protection is finally being activated." "Transferred where?" "Minimum security facility in Virginia. Officially, it's for medical reasons. Better health care for an aging inmate. Unofficially," Benjamin's smile was enigmatic, "let's just say that certain classified operations have finally been declassified, and my sacrifice is being quietly acknowledged." Marcus felt a mixture of joy and loss. "You're getting out?" "Not out exactly, but I'll have more freedom, better conditions, and most importantly, the chance to teach again. The FBI is starting a new program for training behavioral analysts, and they need instructors with real-world experience." "You're going back to the Bureau?" "In a limited capacity. Seems there's still value in an old agent's knowledge, even if he can never officially wear the badge again." Benjamin finished packing and turned to face Marcus directly. "But that's not why I wanted to talk to you tonight." Benjamin reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin, leather-bound notebook, one of the journals he'd been writing in for decades. "This is for you. Everything I've learned about reading people, understanding motivation, navigating the moral complexities of law enforcement. Consider it a textbook for the Academy." Marcus accepted the journal with trembling hands. "Benjamin, I don't know how to thank you." Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you graduate from Quantico, when you're using what I've taught you to protect innocent people and catch the guilty. Thank me when you face your first real moral crisis, and remember that the badge gives you authority, not absolution. The next morning, Benjamin Hayes was transferred out of Riverside Correctional Facility in an unmarked federal vehicle. Marcus watched from the guard tower as the man who had changed his life disappeared down the prison access road, carrying with him 4 decades of secrets and the quiet dignity of someone who had paid the ultimate price for his principles. 6 months later, Marcus graduated from the FBI Academy with honors. His first assignment was to the Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico, the same unit Benjamin Hayes had helped establish over half a century earlier. On his desk, he kept the leather journal and a simple motto Benjamin had taught him: "Justice is not about being right, it's about making things right." Years passed. Marcus built a distinguished career as a federal agent, specializing in cases involving organized crime and corruption. He never forgot the lessons learned in Block C, and he often found himself sharing Benjamin's wisdom with younger agents who were struggling with the same moral complexities that had once consumed him. On a cold December evening, 15 years after their first meeting, Marcus received a call from a Virginia medical facility. Benjamin Hayes had passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 88. He had spent his final years teaching, writing, and quietly mentoring a new generation of federal agents who would never know the full extent of what he had sacrificed for their training. At the private funeral service, Marcus was surprised to see dozens of attendees, former FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and even a few retired federal judges who had traveled across the country to pay their respects. As the service concluded, an elderly man approached Marcus and identified himself as Anthony Castellano, the federal witness Benjamin had protected in 1982. "Agent Thompson," Castellano said, his voice thick with emotion, "I wanted you to know that Benjamin Hayes saved my life, my daughter's life, and the lives of countless others who testified because they knew the Bureau would protect them. He never got the recognition he deserved, but his legacy lives on in every agent who learned from him." Marcus nodded, thinking of the leather journal that still sat on his desk, filled with the wisdom of a man who had understood that true heroism often meant accepting blame rather than claiming credit. That night, Marcus opened the journal one final time and found a note written on the last page in Benjamin's careful handwriting. "Marcus, if you're reading this, it means I've completed my final assignment. Remember that justice is not a destination but a journey, and that the most important battles are often fought not with weapons, but with wisdom, patience, and the courage to do what's right when no one is watching. The badge you wear represents not power over others, but responsibility to them. Wear it with honor. BH." As Marcus closed the journal, he realized that Benjamin Hayes had given him far more than career advice or investigative techniques. He had shown him that redemption was possible even in the darkest circumstances, that true strength came from restraint rather than force, and that sometimes the greatest victories were achieved by those who were willing to sacrifice everything for principles that others couldn't even see. The prison guard who had once mocked a silent old inmate had become an agent who understood that the most powerful lessons often came from the most unexpected teachers. And somewhere in a Virginia cemetery, Benjamin Hayes rested, knowing that his legacy would continue in the countless lives touched by those he had trained, protected, and inspired to choose justice over convenience, wisdom over power, and service over self.